Okay, we're good. All right, so housekeeping, first item, as you just learned, this is a hybrid format. So we've got an online audience as well as our in-person audience here. And we are recording this meeting on Zoom in the virtual space. We do post our meetings typically within 48 hours of the presentation. And that's so, we post to our YouTube channel. And so if anyone misses the meeting or has someone they would like to refer to and look back, it's there on our YouTube. It's not letting me control the PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. So one item that there's been some back and forth about since we met last are the buoys. So that northern pit is outlined by buoys, but time after time, there's problems with the buoys. And I understand that the line more frequently, or has been breaking actually more frequently nowadays than previously. And so the responsible parties, they decided to go ahead and just replace the entire line after it broke more recently. Kind of hard to tell, but just to give you So last time we met, we went over the package of reports that we had reviewed that were a part of the 90% design. So when you're doing an engineering project like the cleanup of the northern pit, you have stages in the remedial process that are milestones. And when you get to the 90% design package, you're almost clearly to 100%. You're almost all the way to that final design. So when you get to a 90% in a design of how you're actually going to execute the construction and the effort, you should have a pretty good idea of what's going to take place. And how it was really just a plan to make a plan. Well, then on March 24th, the responsible parties consultants submitted this package to the EPA, which is actually looks to be a bit more hefty than that 90% design package. They submitted this to the EPA, asking them a few very specific things and making their argument as well. So the letter came and the supporting material came from International Paper and McGinnis Industrial Maintenance Corporation, which, let's not be misled here, that's the subsidiary of Waste Management. And when I looked, you know, of course, I'm going to research the people who signed the letter, right? And so when I get the letter and I see it, I'm like, okay, who's it from? All right, let me go look at these guys. And I'm looking up who these people are. All I can find on the guy who signed it on behalf of McGinnis is that he's a senior director for Waste Management. So, aka Waste Management. So the task or their ask of the EPA was to pause the design process for the northern pit, to have a meeting with the agency to discuss amending the cleanup plan as signed in the 2017 record of decision. And they were also asking to be allowed to not clean up the site to the standard as was outlined in the record of decision or ROD. What I mean by that is in the ROD, what we all had asked for and what the EPA signed into the record was to clean up to 30 parts per trillion. That is the exposure standard for a child recreating in the area. The responsible parties and their consultants are asking to clean up to a surface weighted average, which keyword there, average. Dilution is the solution to pollution. That's what that means. They are not asking for the EPA to require them to say, okay, we've taken this sample from this location. It's clean. It's below 30 parts per trillion. This area is good. No, they want to pick up some from here and some from here and some from here. And then go, let's run it in an analysis and take the average. And based on that average, we might call it good, or we might say, no, it's still a hot spot. We need to remove more. It's not acceptable. You know, we need to know that the people who recreate in this river, the people who live around the river and our seafood is protected. And doing it where we could dilute hot spots with clean spots is not really going to protect anyone fully for the long term. All right, so their argument. They had a few very specific items that they held onto for their argument to, make these requests that they had just asked, and ultimately try to get the record of decision altered. So they kept citing new information. I thought this was really interesting because most of these points that they argued were not new information. So one of the items that they brought up was the increase in volume, the increase of waste to be removed. We've known that for several years. Nothing is new there. The increased depth, we've known that for years. That's nothing new. It is different. I will give you that. It is different from when that record of decision was signed. When the record of decision was signed, we only thought the waste pits were 12 to 14 feet deep. We now know that in some of the areas, not everywhere, but some of the areas, they're about 30 feet deep. So there is a dramatic increase in waste to be removed. Then one of the points here that they argued was the inability to excavate in the dry, the inability to fully isolate, remove the water, and safely excavate that material. One thing here also that I thought was quite interesting is they're basically telling the EPA in here in this letter that they can't reasonably meet the requirement to put water back into the river that's not at levels that are safe. So water management is one of the biggest complexities at this site. One of, not the biggest, but one of. And also one of the most expensive parts of this cleanup. They're going to come across a ton of water as they remove this waste. Not only are they going to have to pump the original river water out of the isolated area, they're going to encounter groundwater as they continue excavating deeper. And as it is right now, they are not supposed to discharge any of that water back into the river that has unsafe levels of contaminants in it. They're telling the EPA that they can't do that. Well, can you really not do it, or do you not want to pay to do it? Because to me, it can be done. Will it be expensive? Oh yeah, it will be very expensive, but it's not impossible. Another item here that I know some of you will probably be frustrated with is that they, under new information, they also stated information about the TxDOT bridge replacement. How many years have we been talking about that? And I find it interesting that every time the EPA brings it up, they mention it's still not funded. It's still not, there's still not a final plan. We don't have a final timeline. There's a lot that's still in the works. Now, if it didn't take 5 years to get to this point after the record of decision was signed, maybe we could be halfway through this cleanup. So there are details here that need to continue to be worked out. This is a complex effort. It really, truly is. It is one of, if not the most complex engineering designs the EPA is working on right now for Superfund cleanups in our country. That's a pretty big deal, but it's not impossible. You know, one of the things I wish they would have done a little more homework on was this appendix that they included in their packet here. Examples of relevant explanations of significant differences in ROD amendments. They gave examples of Superfund site after Superfund site around our country that had a record of decision and then had a change and alter to that record of decision for that became the actual cleanup. Yes, that is very common. When the record of decision is signed, it's usually with a more general concept of what needs to be done to get that material out of there. Then as you go through the discovery process and the more intense sampling and investigation, you typically find that the problem is worse than you originally thought when you had that more general understanding. But you don't say, okay, we tap out. Okay, we can't do it. You address the additional contamination. You take into consideration what you have found and make sure that you're encompassing that. And that's not what is going on here. What I thought was interesting about the sites they listed, there are two things. One, several of those sites we actually have experience working with, and they are still contaminating the local environment today in those communities. Two, the 7 sites around our country that are similar to the San Jacinto River waste pits that have seen cleanup, they weren't listed. So if you're pointing out, hey, here's times where this happened, we can't talk apple to apples. So thought that was pretty interesting. Very quickly, our new U.S. EPA Region 6 Administrator, Dr. Nance, she's from Houston. Very quickly, she sent a response. What I loved about her response, first of all, was that it was less than 2 pages. We're not going to talk about all the fluff. We're not going to talk about all these sites you sent us page after page. Here's the point. Nope. You're not pausing this. We're not going to allow you to pause the Superfund process. Keep going. All your documents are due in June for the full design. We're not going to cut out the public from this process. And there's a couple of different ways it could go. And so she made it clear, you know, we're not cutting the public out. We're going to continue to engage them. And also, we're willing to talk about potentially amending it, right? Because that is, like I said, it is common to have a bit of change to incorporate the newer findings. So I loved it. And another thing that I really loved was, this was one of, if not the first time that I've seen something come from an administrator in the EPA where they really called out, you know, the person who has the financial assurance for one of the responsible parties. And she put mimic and then CO'd waste management. So I appreciate that. So from there, I went and spoke to our commissioners and our county judge, and I brought some, I guess you could say, personal perspective to what's going on and why this needs to keep moving forward and why we need the county to continue offering the support they have. And that was on April 26th. Concerns and questions and things from y'all. So your concerns, your questions, you know, that you share with us tonight and over the next week, I will bring those to that meeting with the EPA and the officials that will be there on the 16th. Also about that, I understand there's at least one new team member in the EPA that's working at like a project management level on the remediation of the northern pit. So this will be the first time since the pandemic that we're meeting in person, and there are multiple team members who have joined this effort for the EPA during the pandemic that we've never met. So I'm really looking forward to this meeting. Now, as for things that you can do, we have a letter here. Last time we met, y'all had some really great input on the design. So we incorporated that into a letter to the EPA, as well as the latest from these updates. And so we have a letter. If anyone is interested in reading the letter, signing the letter, taking home a copy, if you want to sign, leave it with us, we'd love to mail it in. But if anyone would like a copy of this, would you please raise your hand and Rachel will circulate the letters around? Awesome. And also, we have our health surveys at the sign-in. We're going to very soon be hearing from a toxicologist, and you might get your wheels turning. You know, maybe some of the things collecting health data is important for a variety of reasons and helps us make sure that we're not forgetting anybody, you know, that nobody is being overlooked when we're looking at the community's health as a whole. And lastly, our next meeting will be July 12th. And I anticipate that we will have a fair amount of updates for y'all by then. If there's anything critical, we'll keep you posted in the meantime, because between now and then, we will meet with the EPA at least once, and then we should receive those final design documents, depending on how long the EPA takes to get them out publicly. We should have them by then. So stay engaged, and we'll keep y'all up to date with the latest. All right. So now I would love to turn the presentation over to Maritza. She is a toxicologist with Harris County Disease Control. Can you get her the mic, please? Oh,
Now? Okay. Well, yes. What is the pointer? It's okay.
And to just stay like in this area.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here to share with you this concern that I know that this is a big issue. It's a multidisciplinary problem, and it has to be addressed like that. I am only expert in chemical substances and health effects of chemical substances. So I congratulate Thea, Jackie, and her team, because I know that they are passionate about that. You know, they work a lot on that. And I know that people, they want to know about all the health effects, what happens with the substances that are involved in this problem. That's why I am going to talk about dioxins. And not only about the proper dioxins, but some compounds that they are very similar to dioxins. That's why I call dioxin-like compounds. Okay. First of all, I am going to talk about general principles about the chemical substances and what happens when you face an exposure to a chemical. That's the main thing. So every time that we are exposed to any substance, it could be a chemical, it could be a medicine, it could be a drug of abuse, anything. What happens in our organism? The first thing is that we have to absorb. We have an exposure for any of the means, by water, by food, by air. This is the exposure phase. So we have absorbed the substances. I mean, when you have a chemical substance here in front of you, it doesn't mean that you are going to get health effects. You get has to be absorbed. If not, you won't get any health effects. Okay. Very easy to absorb. So there is a second part is absorb. Well, you absorb the substances by skin, by food, by inhalation. You absorb the substances. This chemical or this substance is distributed in the organism. It goes to the organism, and then it is metabolized in the organism. And it is very good when it is metabolized, because some substances that are really toxic, when the organism, the body metabolizes that substance, they get less toxic into the organism. And finally, they have to be excreted, mainly by urine, but also some substances are excreted by the nails, by hair, by the sweating, for many ways, but mainly by urine. Mainly by urine. Okay. So what happens when we are exposed? First of all, it has to be absorption by different ways, inhalation, skin, mouth. It has to be a distribution, and all what we call a target organ. Not all the substances go to one organ, the same organ. No. One, they get in love with the heart. One, they get in love with the brain. One, with the liver, with the kidney. So they have organs. So they have to go distributed to the target organs. After that, they are metabolized. What's the main organ that metabolizes the substances? The liver. That's why we have to take care of the liver. This is very important organ in the body, because he is in charge of all the biodegradation of the substances. That's the liver. And then after the liver, we have to be good kidneys. You know, we have to be careful about how we can care about our nephrons, our kidneys. Why? Because this is the main way of elimination of the substances is urine. But also, as I told you, sweat, feces, breast milk. That's the problem with the children at breastfeeding, because mother, they can eliminate substances by the breast milk. So it is absorbed into the children. Okay. This is what the organism does to the chemical. But the chemical says, oh, this is what the organism is doing to me. So what I am going to do to the person. So this is different. What they do, they produce health effects, long-term effects, acute effects, subchronic effects, many health effects. However, we have something, we have a body which is perfect. Our body is perfect, you know, because we have this capacity to fight the substances. It is not easy that we get a health effect. No, the body has many mechanisms of defense. Some mechanism of defense is the immunity. So we have to have the immune system in very good conditions. We have detoxification. I talk about that because of the liver. And we have systems that they call regulation. So what happens when we face the substances? It has to be a big amount. It has to be a chronic exposure. So the body, when the body feels that it is overwhelmed with the substances, so the chemical substance, the health effects appear. First, the body does everything. For example, we look all very well. We look all very healthy. And we know that during the day, we have many exposures to many substances, even in our food, or if you smoke, or if you take a medicine, or the mixture. We are good. We are good. Why? Because our organism fights. Okay. There are some factors that influence this type of toxicity of the health effects, and they are very particular of every person. Of course, we have the chemical substances, they have something that they call physicochemical properties. The dose, that's really important. What's the dose? It's not the same, a small amount, it's not the same as a big amount. The presence of other chemicals, that's a big issue, because here we are not breathing only benzene, only dioxin, only asphalt products. No, we have a mixture of substances that we are inhaling and we are breathing. So this chemical mixture makes the problem very big, because you never know what of the substances, which one is the responsible for the health effects. So this is called the mixture, the chemical mixtures. They interact between, and they can produce a third substance, which could produce C, and C could be much higher. So this is very important. Okay, some of them, they are very persistent substances. They last a long time, not only in the environment, not only in the water, not only in the, but in our bodies. For example, mercury, the contamination with mercury years in the environment and years in our body. The exposure, it could be by air, water, force. The frequency, that's very important. How frequently? Yes.
Try to stay like on the side.
Yeah.
On the screen. The folks online, we can't see you.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Salud. Is okay like that here? Here?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the ways of absorption, inhalation, skin, oral, etc. What is important also, if it is an acute exposure and a chronic exposure, here with the problem that we have, It's a chronic exposure. That's every day, because you can drink water contaminated every day. You can breathe every day. So that's a chronic exposure. Chronic exposure produces acute effects and also chronic effects. A chronic effect, for example, is cancer. We call a delayed effects. Chronic effects, cancer is a chronic effect. What is important? The individual factors, the age. That's important. Children, they are very vulnerable for many reasons. Children, you have to care a lot about the exposure when children are present. The gender, women, men, not the same. Biochemical compounds in our body makes us very different one from the another. The genetics, that's really important. We were born with a genetic, a specific genetic. Nobody can change that. We can change exposure, but we cannot change the DNA. I am going to take this DNA out. No, the genetic, that's really important. The health condition. If you have a pre-exposure disease like diabetes or hypertension or things like that, you are more vulnerable, of course, to everything. The lifestyles, alcohol. I don't say that you are drunk every day, no, but I say that the alcohol influences the metabolism of the substances in a very big rate. That's alcohol. Smoking. If you think about smoking and cancer, smoking has, the cigarettes has more than 70 carcinogenic substances and pesticides, because you have to use pesticides for that. So smoking is very important. Nutrition, what you eat, what you are. Medicines, there are many medicines that influence all that happen in our bodies. The environmental justice, this is a big issue now. We know that disadvantaged populations, they are more susceptible to have health effects, but health services, the nutrition is not good, they don't have good health, and then they are more vulnerable. And the environmental factors, of course, the humidity was the wind, was the environmental, the meteorological conditions, that's important. So, as I say here, all these factors that I mentioned together, they make us very individual susceptible. I mean, individual susceptibility. You and you are not the same. Even you are, I have twins, and my twins are totally different one from the other. It makes, we are totally different. So when some people say, some health organization or something, they say, but this is not true that this person is having such a symptoms, because one that lives very close to him, he doesn't have anything. I don't have anything. No, it's not like that. You never know what factors this person has that he has symptoms, signs that the other one doesn't have. So it's like an occupational exposure. The manager says he cannot complain because he's working with Peter and John, and Peter and John, they don't have anything. No, it's not like that, because you can have many things that the other one don't have. That's individual susceptibility, which is really important. And we have 4 susceptible groups. One, the ones that have a previous disease. Previous disease, you are very, you have a lot of possibilities of getting worse. The children, of course, the person, the age, very important, and pregnant woman. Why? Because before we believe that the substances or the chemicals, they didn't pass to the fetus. Of course, they go to the children, they go to the infants. And then when they have breastfeeding, as I told you, many substances come in the milk, and you cannot avoid that. Children, they have many reasons to be more susceptible. Why? Because the mechanism of defense of a child is not the same as ours. We have developed our mechanism of defense. As a child, it doesn't have the mechanism of defense develop. So they are more vulnerable. They have a habit which is very bad. Everything is to mouth. It is the habit, hand to mouth. Everything goes like that. And this is something that they are very vulnerable. The size, they are small. So it is possible that they get the dust or the pollutants that are in the soil. They have many factors that. So now we enter in the dioxins. So there is a big problem here with dioxins. You know that in my experience, in Venezuela, I am a professor at the university and a researcher, and I went once to United Nations course in Russia. Before that, I didn't care a lot about dioxins. Dioxin. Venezuela, we talk about dioxins. We were talking all day, lead, mercury, pesticides, drugs abuse, and things like that. When I realized, when I went there, I saw one institute, huge institute, specialist in dioxins. And then I saw, oh my goodness, it has to be something important here. And since that time, I am learning about dioxins. So, and dioxins-like compounds, it is because they are very similar. We have dioxins, and the worst, the very bad one is tetrachlorodibenzodioxin, which is called TCDD. We have furans, which are it's a relative of dioxins. We have the polychlorinated biphenyls, which are also relatives of dioxins. So this is a family of chemicals that very similar chemical properties. They are no manufactured, so they come for reactions that we don't produce dioxins. We don't elaborate dioxins. We don't manufacture dioxins, but we have dioxins because they are byproducts, products of some reactions, chemical reactions. They come, let's say, by accident. These are the dioxins. And here, for example, we have the TCDD, the famous TCDD, tetrachlorodibenzodioxin. This is the worst of the worst. Similar to the furans, tetrachlorodibenzofuran. But here here, if you see here, this has 6 sites and 5 sites. And you say, oh, that's not important. I am not a chemist. I don't care about that. I do, I care. Because that difference makes the effects very different. They are relatives, but they are not the same. They are highly toxic compounds. They are more or less 75 chemicals, 75. This is the more toxic, the TCDD. They can cause problems to the very important system in our organism, the developmental system, the immune system, the reproductive system, and they are not manufactured. So they come by products of some reactions. This is a big issue. They can stay in the body and remain for many years. It's not from today for tomorrow. We are not going to delete the dioxins so easily. No, they stay in your organism and they stay in the environment. And this is one of the big issues because these are permanent substances. But it's very difficult to get rid of that. Okay, that's why they are called persistent organic pollutants, the famous POPs, because they are persistent. And where they are persistent, they are cumulative. And that's the problem. They accumulate. They are everywhere. I'm sorry, but they are ubiquitous, very everywhere. And for example, here, they do not produce use, but they come for processes as a byproduct. How can we be exposed? I can imagine the problem here. By food, especially animal fats, meat, dairy products, fish, Fish has so many disadvantages. I love fish. And maybe I have eaten fish with mercury a lot. But, you know, fish not only gets mercury, but get dioxins. And poultry, okay. Breathing it, accidentally ingesting contaminated soil for children playing in the playground. Absorption through skin. When we live in the near hazardous waste site, incinerators. The incinerators, I remember that in Venezuela, in a big hospital in my city, they couldn't put the incinerator of to destroy the biological materials because people, they didn't want the incinerator. They prefer to have the trash than to have the products that come with the incinerator. And one of the products are dioxins. So it was a big problem. And in occupational exposure, of course, in occupational exposure, because people that work in the pulp and paper industry in incineration plants, in hazardous waste plants. So this is an occupational exposure. An occupational exposure is something chronic. It's not today or no, it's today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow for a long time. That's occupational exposure. So they transport from the sources, they go to the environment, they go to the water, they are absorbed for soil and plants, they go, the animals, they eat that, and finally they go to our organism, to our water. Sorry, Ivan, with some days with. Okay. So we have here the emission, could be a plant, it could be a Superfund, anything that produces. It go to the homes, to the environment, to the soil, to the food, and then we can have them by inhalation, the direct contact, which is very normal, ingestion. Let's see the health effects. Skin effects produce a lot. Skin. You know, skin, chloracne, something that is called chloracne, very typical from that. Congenital malformations. This is called modifications, you know, children that are born with congenital malformations. Diabetes, high cholesterol, learning disabilities, suppression in of the problems of the lung, pregnancy loss, fertility decrease, sperm counts, and cancer. And cancer is related mainly to TCDD because they produce cancer on multiple sites, lung cancer, and it is also associated with a cancer which is the soft tissue sarcoma. So are they carcinogenic? Yes, they are. And to be carcinogenic, a substance, you don't need a big amount. You need just a small amount in a very good day. Because when there is a multiplication, proliferation of damaged cells, you can have just the impact of a low dose, a cell, to multiply this cell in a bad way to get a cancer, to get a tumor. The polychlorinated biphenyls. These are the famous PCBs. They are the relatives, but they are created. They are synthetic. We have produced that. Okay, they can produce many different effects. They are colorless to light. They don't have smell. Some are very volatile. And they were here, they were banned in 1979. Does it mean that we don't have here? Yes, we do, because of the persistence. And this is the names of the more popular: phenochlor, arochlor, canechlor. Okay. We have PCBs in many products. We have in paints, we have in paper, we have in substances that we have for the clothing, we have in fluorescent, we have in oils, lubricants, many sources of exposure. For example, here, And in applications, they are using plasticizers in many places. They have very good qualities to be used, for example, as a lubricant. They have very good quality to be used in capacitors. What happened in my country? One day I was almost died because I knew some people, they use a special oil for rheumatism, for pain of the muscles. And then they were selling that. And then somebody told me, you know, they took that for the old capacitors. They have our oil. What? That oil is terrible. And they use that, you know, for pain. That's country. Maybe in another country, maybe don't use, you don't have that. A human exposure. We have here exposure. Somebody is taking behind here. I don't know who, the ghost. Okay. A small amount are found. The levels, of course, they are decreasing because they were banned, but the products that they use, they are still going on. So that's why we still have this problem. Contaminated fish everywhere. Burning of waste, many possibilities of exposure. Accident, leaking. The transformers in the light, of course, you don't have that, but in our countries, in developing countries, we have a lot of transformers with PCBs, a lot. So people stole that, they steal that, they take the oil and they use the oil for sell. From electrical devices. So that's why that we don't have very old TV or very old refrigerator, but maybe they can have these PCBs in Superfund sites, in contaminated pools, swimming, which is very good to swim, but not to swim in a contaminated area. Okay, they have low acute toxicity, that's good. But as they persist in the environment, they accumulate in the environment, they have chronic toxicity. Chronic toxicity means for a long time, and for maybe the effects appear in 10 years because they have chronic toxicity. But for the dioxins, for all the brain is affected. Immunological, I told you, we have to take care of the immune systems because now with the COVID and things like that, the immune systems, the levels are low. We call endocrine disruptors. And these endocrine disruptors are some substances that they hit the endocrine system. And what is the endocrine system in our body? Our glands. Endocrine system regulates all our body. So that's very important. Are associated with cancer. Several institutions here and in the world that they classify the cancer substances. They say this is cancer, is number one, the other one says another thing. 3 institutions here, which are different. For example, this is from US, Department of Health and Human Services. They say, may reasonably be anticipated as carcinogenic. It is because they prove that they were carcinogenic in an experimental animals, but maybe they have not complete the studies humans. And the EPA says it's probably carcinogenic. So it is carcinogenic. And the IARC is the International Agency of Research of Cancer, which is in France, in Lyon, France. They say carcinogenic to humans. You know, the European Union sometimes is more strict to classify. So they are not saying possibly maybe, no, they don't say maybe. This one is says this is group 1, which is the worst, carcinogenic human. They, the environmental phase, they go to every environmental way. They go to air, they go to water, they go to soil, etc. The same as dioxins. Once in the environment, they remain for a very long time. And they absorb in the soil. And then when they go to the water, they absorb in the soil. And in air, you know, they can be here in Houston, and you know that we have found in the Arctic animals with PCBs. And you say, how can you have a very clean environment? Well, they have the power of being translocated from this point of the source to a remote site. That's why we say, oh, that's unbelievable. The Arctic, oh my goodness, it has to be very clean. It's only ice there. But they have moved the substances and they there. And that's the problem here. The dioxins, they come to the water, okay? They deposit here. They deposit here in the phytoplankton. They absorb to the substances, to the soil, to the sediments in the phytoplankton. Unless there is a storm, something that moves that water and they are released. That's the problem. And then here, they are taken by animals in the food. I mean, these ones, you know, this is the small fish, the medium fish, and the bigger fish. That's why be like that in the fish, the very big, you know, as in Venezuela. You caught a fish, this a beautiful fish, but they have more possibilities of accumulating chemical substances. Why? Because they not only bioaccumulate, but they magnify I mean, you are accumulating, let's say, 4 times. So they will be 7 times, as you see here. You know, that's points, more points here of toxicity of the substance, and more points here. Bigger the fish, the more possibility has, the most possibility have that they get contaminated. And there have been some accidental poisons, very bad in the world. This one was in Japan. They call that the Yusho disease. They ate rice, always rice. You know, they ate rice contaminated an oil. More than 5 people died because of it. And what they saw, acne-like eruptions. It looks like acne. The pigmentation of the skin, darker skin. The eye discharge. This is the main symptoms that they produce. Something more. You know that we are talking about Ukraine, and the president, Jacinto, that was in Ukraine in port, he was dioxin with TCDD in food. So he came from like that, very answer to be like that, you know. And this is very difficult to bring back what was the reason? The TCDD. You know, this is a very good slide because you can compare here. It is called the chloracne. Chloracne because the dioxin has chlorine in the formula. That's what it's called, chloracne. The hyperpigmentation because it's darker, you know. The hyperkeratosis. It has cysts, so, and other effects. So he came, and after that he was president of Ukraine. So conclusions. First, we have to understand that they are highly toxic, very toxic, even at very low levels. They are very persistent, the POPs. They accumulate, they last in the media for a very long time. They remain in the environment for a very long time. So, I mean, the remediation that they are trying to do now, I know that this is very, very difficult issue because they remain a lot. And to get rid of everything, this is something that is not very easy. The contamination of the dioxins is an increasing problem because some people, they don't know about that, and some people in developing countries is worse. Why? Because the burning is not controlled, the recycling of electronic products like computers, we can have exposure about that. So it is necessary a strict control in the industries and a strict control of also in the media, and more in the media that are contaminated as the case that you have, or all of us have, because all people that we live in Houston, we have to be vulnerable to understand that this is not an issue of one area of Houston, it's an issue of everybody. So that's all that I have for you. Thank you. By the way, there is brochure that I brought, and it is a survey that I designed in the web of PCS. So I would appreciate if you have time in your homes to go to the web, and there is one survey in English, one survey in Spanish. So if you don't mind, if you want to answer that, because I am working in a case study with these surveys, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was excellent.
Thank you.
Open it up for your questions and your concerns, and whether they're Superfund related, you know, they're Superfund related questions, then I can answer them. And then if, you know, they're related to the presentation that you just saw, then Maritza will answer your questions for that. Don't be shy. Somebody has to be first. Lisa, yes. Hold on one sec. We'll get.
Most of you know me, I'm on Thea's board, but a comment that this isn't over until the waste is out of the river. And I know it was a really big victory when we had the EPA record of decision to remove it rather than leave it in the river. But the responsible parties have a lot more resources than we do. And they are advocating for the response. As Jackie has told you many times, they want it in 2011, potentially. And so again, keep that in mind as we continue advocating and realize this is, we didn't give up in 2017. It's not done till it's done.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. Do we have any additional questions, concerns, comments? No? Huh. Well, I think that we just learned a lot of information, and I was really fascinated by some of the things, you know, that you let us know about. So I really appreciate you bringing that information to us. We've been talking about these contaminants in the San Jacinto site for a decade now. Thanks. And we're still, you know, learning new things. So I really appreciate that. Yes. So once the final documents come in June, like you said, assuming they do, we don't have, a designated time that the EPA would turn around and provide a response, but it does appear that they are increasing the size of their team that's working on this effort. And in recent years, they have gotten a lot better about quickly making documents available to the public and notifying us when they do. So, we haven't seen as much of that activity where a report or something is produced and then it just goes on a shelf and nobody's told about it. The remedial project manager has been doing a really good job of communicating with us and letting us know, hey, this is ready, for your viewing. So I anticipate that we won't have too much lag time, but I can't guarantee, what that timeline will be like. Does that answer your question, Mark? So are you asking about the timeline on the Southern impoundment in terms? That's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that for certain. So I don't want to speculate what the time was between the 90% and then actually ordering the cleanup. At a minimum, it was less than 1 year. I know that for sure. But I wouldn't feel comfortable going any closer than that. I do believe it was though. Yes. Sorry, let me bring you the mic, Carolyn.
You mentioned the CAC meeting, CAC meeting, and the increase of the EPA members that will be coming. Why the increase? Is it because they had more time to read it over, think it over during the COVID? Or is it because the new director, Miss Nance, is from this area and more interested in the pits? I mean, just what is your take on it?
So the increase is, for one, taking place at our site, but there's an increase of personnel agency wide. They have hired or are hiring over 1,000 additional personnel. And so there's a really big time of the EPA is in a time of growth right now. They've seen an increase in budget size. And, my understanding is there's one new team member, as I mentioned, at a minimum to the waste pits that's joined the team fairly recently. And, it might even continue to grow from there because of the complexity of this effort. It really, it is a major engineering effort, and the current remedial project manager, she's not an engineer. She doesn't have a background in engineering, and she doesn't have, a really technical background. And so I think they are bringing on folks onto their team that have more of those complementing backgrounds to this process. Oh, I saw. Yep, hold on. Let's get the mic to you. No. Okay, I'm just gonna turn back back around. Okay. Yes, the question was, is there an estimated time for the cleanup? So the estimated time for the cleanup is about 7 years. But you know what it's like in construction. They say 7 years, but it's really never actually that amount of time. It's often more. So that is one of the items that, is to be discussed because of the significant increase in volume of waste to be removed. It's potentially going to impact the time frame, especially with the schedule as they have it, where they would only remove waste for part of the year and not year round. So, you're looking at a much longer timeline than originally thought. Oh, okay. Hey, hi, Chris. So is any getting into the air? Good question. Okay, so I don't recall ever seeing air sampling from this process at the waste pits. I know that there are some communities that have had dioxin contaminated sites and they've gone in and they've tested the dust in neighboring homes' attic and actually found the dioxin particles in the attics and the dust. But I don't think anything like that has gone on here or even, air testing at the site. This is not the greatest concern here is not that these contaminants are going to vaporize. If it were, it would be more of like dust particles. And so dust control during remediation is absolutely part of this. All right, so great questions. Harvey absolutely impacted the site. I don't have a clear answer on the term. Oh, it's gone now. The term that you used about asking about a release during Harvey from the site. But storms are a mechanism of further disrupting and distributing these contaminants. And we worked with Dr. Sam Brody, who's from Texas A&M Galveston, on a flood risk assessment. And, he said very confidently that the communities around the waste pits get a double dose of dioxin from storm surge, because the storm surge comes in and goes north upriver, and the that it has, the velocity, and the capabilities of picking up those contaminants and carrying it north with it, and wherever the floodwaters might go. We can't say for certain if we haven't tested that area. Then when the surge is going back out, then it's when the water is washing back down to the bay and out to the coast, then it can as well carry dioxin particles with it. But we know that this temporary cap that's on the site was ripped up in Harvey, no doubt about that. And that I know the surface water testing that's taken place since then has found extremely high levels of dioxin in the water column of the river water. They absolutely do plan to remove the waste as of right now. The EPA has a plan of how that should take place, but they've been working on the responsible parties consultants have been working on the fine details of how exactly to execute that plan. And this summer is a big summer for finding out information, for asking the EPA to hold firm. And that's really what we did. Once we got the news that then allowed us to understand why that report, that 90% report, was so sparse, because time that, in my opinion, could have been spent over here on the design and figuring out how to actually execute this cleanup was spent over here, how to make the argument to not do it. And once we found out that they were making that argument, we went to the press right away. We started notifying community members, we started notifying elected officials, and we notified the press. And very quickly, the EPA, in fact, the next business day, the EPA turned around their response, denying the request from the responsible parties. So that now is the time to continue letting them know you care about this, keeping the heat on, because as Lisa said, it's not done until the waste is out of there, and it's out of there safely. And we need it done in a controlled environment. Hurricane season is right around the corner. And I know a lot of our residents really fear every hurricane season. And it's approaching, and it's going to be an important one for this site, no doubt. When? Yes. So the southern impoundment, which we really haven't talked about today, the southern impoundment will or should see physical construction begin this fall. They should actually physically start removing waste from that southern impoundment this fall. The northern waste pit, I have no idea. I wish I had a bit of confidence to tell you, but with where we are right now, I couldn't say for certain. Yes. Take a picture. Call me. Absolutely. So living near the question of, yeah, the question is basically if the faucet water for Highlands, I believe that's Water District 1 by the fire station. Yeah, by the fire station. If the faucet water, I'm assuming is the tap water, the public supply is contaminated. So Water District 1, the last I communicated with them and received a letter from them, they're supplied by, in part, surface water, and the other is by 2 groundwater wells. One is pretty close to the river, and the other is a bit more inland from the river. And when I reviewed the data that the Water District had done on dioxin testing, one, it was very sparse. The law only requires a public supplier to test for TCDD every 5 years. So what goes on in those 5 years between that one-time test is unknown, because if you're not testing for it, you're not going to find it. And the tests I've seen independently of what Water District 1 has done, I did not see dioxin in the independent test. Now, this is the public supply. This is not individual wells. And I did see some PCBs in independent testing, which I was surprised. I wasn't expecting to see the PCBs, but we did. So according to the screen, I've answered the question. But no, hopefully I really answered your question. Good questions. So the TxDOT bridge, that's uncertain. You know, the argument that if you know, the argument is to be made that the waste can't be removed or you know, yeah, that it can't, that the construction can't take place because of the bridge construction and the access road. That's really the thing, is that the access road that is used to clean up this site and do work on this site is the TxDOT access road. But agreements for easements and agreements for land access, those are very common type of effort. So that should by no means stop or hinder this. And someone were to argue that it would replace, I would say the largest thing to be concerned about is, okay, then what about an emergency? What about an that will blow large on the northern pit? If land access is the issue, what are you gonna do in an emergency? You know, so we have to agreements, you know, way around these issues. And the site